Welcome, everybody, to the CFF list best and worst predictions for week 9, as well as our year to date recap of the leaders through week 8. I'm Jay Mill. I've got my partner, Willie B, as usual. How's everything, Willie?
Doing all right today. Finally feeling like October here in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I woke up, it was pretty cold outside. I thought I needed a jacket, but decided to not go back in the house. So a little bit chilly up here in the Northeast as well. So definitely feeling like football weather, which always happens around Halloween, which is a good thing. If you're new to the show, what we try to do every week is sort through the top 12 and top 16 year to date leaders list for quarterbacks, tight ends, wide receivers, and running backs. Give you our best predictions on who from those lists might have the best and the worst weeks, along with some notes on who's jumped in and who's jumped out or been pushed out of those lists. So you can keep up with kind of who the hot players are and who might be on the downslide. So you can make better roster decisions as we approach the most critical weeks of the season, getting ready to make your playoff run. Hopefully, we can offer some nice insight as to what you should be looking out for, specifically for week 9 with this broadcast. So, Willie, I know we did a pretty good job picking the winners and losers for week 8. We'll get into the specifics of that as we go along, but I think I outscored you 9-8, which brings the season total, if I'm not mistaken, to 69 for me and 72 points for you. So, even though I beat you by one, I'm still a little bit behind. But we had a really good week overall, I'll say. The only position we got shut out at was wide receiver, which we'll talk about when we get there. But otherwise, we did a good job collectively as far as nailing some of these best and worst predictions overall. But we'll get into specifics, like I said, as we jump in. But right now, we are looking at the receivers' actual performances from week 8. So, for example, you'll see the 11.8 there next to Torrey Horton. That shows you his exact points for week 8. And if you look through the list, what you'll notice is it was a pretty poor week again for wide receivers in general. 9 out of the 15 who played, because we did have one that was on a bye, scored less than 16 points. And even among those 9, 7 of those 9 had under 13 points. So, in general, I'd say for the top 16 group, not a real stellar performance. As you can see, a lot of the guys at the top, Torrey Horton with 12, Troy Franklin with 12, Adunze with 13. Probably the worst here was Wester, who really disappointed with his 5.4. He still got his 9 targets. He's been one of the most targeted receivers out there, but he was only able to convert that into 4 catches for 14 yards. There were good performances at some of the other position groups, but wide receivers, I'd say, was probably the loser this week when it came to the overall production. Any thoughts on that, Willie?
Yeah, if you know, just the lack of scoring overall, I thought was kind of down, and um, I didn't really think that LSU was going to do what they did to Army.
Right,
So
right.
both their guys just went off. I actually thought they would just run a lot more than they did, and I was wrong in that regard. So
Yeah, and looking at that, you could see with Neighbors and Thomas, 28.1 points and 27.2. Yeah, the way I was looking at that is they wouldn't have to throw as much as they did, so those two might actually be a little bit down this week. It turned out to be total opposite. They put
mhm.
their foot on the neck of Army and ended up with the 62-0 win. Neighbors and Thomas, had the second and third best games of the week. Um, but as far as our predictions go, yeah, I was way off. I thought that North Carolina would hold Malik Washington to maybe just an average game. I certainly didn't expect him to get the 29.5 that he did. So he's. I talked about what a great athlete he was last week, but just that I had more faith in the North Carolina defense. Uh, he proved that he's probably going to be able to score his points against anybody. So I got the 0 there for my worst pick. The same thing happened with you with Macklin. It looks like Macklin, is really going to be a consistent player, now that we're past the midway point for North Texas. Did you happen to watch any of that game, Willie?
I watched yeah, actually I watched the whole thing, to be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got to see that and dread every catch he had, because I thought Tulane would do a better job of holding them down.
Yeah.
But no, I was wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about the fact that, they'd given up some yards, but Tulane had done a good job of keeping guys out of the end zone. We can't be right every week. We're kind of starting with our worst predictions here. The other position groups we promised we did much better on, but because if you look at our best picks too, I had Corley. He ended up with 10.7. You had Adunze with 13. Um, both of those guys just couldn't put enough together. At least not be able to get in the end zone. To put themselves at the top to compete with those guys in the 20s. They didn't finish in the bottom three either, but I probably wouldn't have been happy if I played Corley or Adunze this week.
Well, with the Dune say, I mean, yeah, I felt like they didn't wake up until the fourth quarter. So,
Yeah.
so he pretty much got that together, in the fourth, 5 for 82, which wasn't much. So, um, I have no idea what happened with them against Arizona State.
Let's forget the receivers from last week, since that was the worst performance on our end. Let's roll up to the current top 16 list and see how things change. The later we get in the season, the less turnover you'll see in terms of the names in the top 16. But there is only one change this week, and it's a guy that Willie B referenced last week that needed to put a stamp on his presence this season, and that's Marvin Harrison Jr. If you look at the number 10 spot there, you can see that he worked his way in all the way from 24th up to number 10 with a 33.2 point game, which gives him 3 games over 30 plus this year, and 5 of his games over 22. He did have 2 in the single digits in the first half of the season with Igbuka out. His production is way up. He had 16 targets this last game. He had 13 targets in the 2 games before this. So the last 3 games, he's had 13 plus targets. But yeah, you called Marvin Harrison out as needing to show what he was capable of this week and make his way into the top 16, and here he is, Willie.
Yeah, no, like I say, and it's impressive. I mean, because this is what you wanted from the best receiver in the country,
Right.
and against Penn State. So, I hats off to him. He showed out, and he's up here on the list.
The guy he actually replaced on the list was Restrepo from Miami. We talked about him last week and the fact that he had become Van Dyke's favorite target, but we also mentioned he might be a guy that's in and out because they have 3 receivers at Miami that kind of seem to take turns having the big games. Well, he's still the starter worthy candidate, but you got to be a little bit careful there because he's sharing the targets with a couple other guys that have had solid seasons over there at Miami as well.
But also too, you got to give Clemson credit because they played that contain ball with him because he only had 26 yards.
Right. So
So in the previous couple of weeks, he was over 100 2 weeks ago, and then he had 96 against North Carolina. So they did a great job of containing him.
right. So maybe in that case you give more credit towards the Clemson defense. 7 targets, for most receivers you'd be happy to get 7
Hmm.
targets. Just for a guy in the top 16 who'd been getting 13 to 18, you might have been looking for a little bit more, but definitely guys out there that are a little bit more consistent that you can look for. And I guess that's what we'll do now, Willie. We'll jump here into who we think will be the most consistent receiver here for Week 9, or the best receiver for Week 9.
Um, I'm gonna go best first, since they have something to prove. Like I said last week, I have no idea what was going on, but Adunze, it is your time to put it together, and you're playing Stanford, who is next to dead last in giving up the pass as far as their passing defense. They're 132nd. and only Colorado's worse. So I expect a lot from Odunze this week.
You can't really go wrong with Rome. He's outside of last week, had a very consistent season. I'm going to go with another guy who has been about as consistent as it gets, which is Colin Lacey for South Alabama. He's going against Louisiana. I know the folks in Louisiana don't like you to add the Lafayette part because they refer to themselves as Louisiana University. But for
Okay.
those here, it's they're playing Louisiana Lafayette, who is 95th against receivers. Uh, they aren't so bad overall against the pass. They're 56th, kind of a middle of the pack team, uh, giving up 216 yards a game. But they are giving up a couple touchdowns a game. Also, they're giving up 13. They've given up 13 touchdowns. Um, so we've referenced the fact that Voisin's been out. It's Lacey's job as a very clear wide receiver one for South Alabama, probably about as clear as it gets for any team out there. So I'm gonna put my chips in on Lacey this week.
Okay. So moving right along, I have two guys here, but one of them is just their offense is just too powerful. So I'm not gonna go Franklin. I know they're
Mm-hmm.
playing Utah, so they're off. Like I say, their offense is just too potent. So I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
take Gage Larvadain. They're playing at Ohio. Ohio is ranked. Let's see, they're 14th against the pass.
Right.
Uh, so I think that's the way to go here. If I had to pick just those two guys, they're only giving up 179 yards through the air. So I think that's going to be a little bit limited. There are so many good wide receivers, as you can see. Everybody here is above 20, and that's what made last week so strange. Is that we had all those guys in the teens.
Yeah. Yeah. To be in the top 16, you would expect just about everybody on the list to get 20 on a pretty regular basis, and more than half were under 16 or less last week. So
Hmm.
a little bit tricky here. It is a pretty tough choice. You got a lot of teams playing against pass defenses that are kind of all middle of the pack. Um, um, I would almost say, go Wester against Charlotte, but I can't see him having two really bad games back to back. So I think I will put a little bit of faith in that Utah defense to hold Troy Franklin down. Um, they've still only given up 5 touchdowns this year as far as passing touchdowns. So I think Franklin's going to have a hard time getting into the end zone against Utah, and strictly making this pick based on the defense today.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy that we both were thinking Franklin at one point. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's interesting.
yeah. My other instinct said Torrey Horton there at going against Air Force, which it says is first against wide receivers. I'm doing a check, and against the pass in general, they're fourth, but they have given up
Hmm.
9 touchdowns. So I could see him working his way into the end zone there against Air Force. But yeah, I think Franklin's a little bit safer pick. And then we've got 4 on a bye. So
Hmm.
next week we'll get back to just about everybody in action. I think the majority of the teams there will have completed their buys as we get through week 9. So with that, we'll take it on up to the tight ends. So a little bit hit or miss, I would say, for tight ends. It wasn't completely a wash in terms of just bad production among the top 12, but we kind of got our usual, 4 out of the 7 here who played scored 6 or less. But you had 3 out of the 7 who ended up with 10 plus. It's a little bit hard to gauge this week, I think, because we had so many that were out on a bye, along with Eric All, who was a DNP because of this, season-ending injury. We found out. So like I said, a little bit hit or miss. You had 3 with 10 plus, 4 with under 6, and another 5 that just didn't play. So hopefully, we see more of these guys in action this week. But as far as last week's predictions, this is where we started to look a little better. We both ended up picking guys that were in the top 3. I had Holker, who scored the high among the group with 12. Willie B had 10.1 with Holden Willis. Unless you were in a league that deducts points for fumbles, which we don't here in this scoring, you might have gotten 8 points because he did have one fumble that he gave away. But uh, overall, Willis continues to impress with now his fifth game in a row with double digits. So he's been mentioned here for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And Holker, you thought that UNLV would be a big test for him, and ended up being a great game that kind of went back and forth there in the last 5 minutes, trading off field goals to see who was going to win the game in the end. But even though his team didn't win, Holker still ended up with 12 points. In a pretty tough game against UNLV. So I'm happy with that. As far as the worst, uh, Willie B had the note that Eric All was injured and predicted him to be the worst because he didn't expect him to play. What we didn't know at the time was it was going to be a season-ending injury. So Eric All is out now for the season. I had predicted Conley would be the worst. He ended up with only 5.6, which was from 2 catches, but it was against a tough James Madison team. What I was happy to see about Conley is that he is back. He looked healthy. He had missed the 2 games because of an ankle. As I mentioned in our waiver watch, I do think Conley is going to be back to, closer to where he was in the beginning of the season, where he's going to be a little bit more reliable as far as maybe a 9 and 10 point type tight end that could kind of get back into the top 12, because I believe he's one of the guys that dropped out this week. So, Willie, anything to add about the performances last week, or do you want to move up to talk about how it's looking this week?
I thought it was just pretty pitiful. David Martin Robinson, he had 2 targets.
Right, right.
Um,
I'm glad you
uh,
mentioned that.
yeah, and then Ben Sinnott is what I call him. Maybe Senate.
It says in the notes, actually on Fantrax, he ended up getting hurt. He had an ankle injury early, ended up trying to tough it out, and came
Hmm.
back. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe because of the injury, he wasn't running routes as efficiently and not his usual self. He ended up with his first game of the season without having a single catch. Um,
Yeah. So and he only had 1 target also.
the thing about Martin Robinson that I'll point out, because he is one of the guys that has departed the top 12. The big note here is he's not worth playing if Warner's not playing. And maybe Warner's going to be back this week. We'll find out. He was in the concussion protocol. He missed his second game in a row, but Martin Robinson has basically become worthless, along with every wide receiver from Temple. If Warner is not in the game, EJ Warner.
And then we kind of knew what Tyler Warren was going to do and going to be. So I mean,
Yeah,
he's just kind of on the list, just because of the lack of scoring at the position. So
yeah. And he's no these bottom four, by the way. As now maybe we'll roll up the 9, 10, 11, and 12 tight ends here are the four that are actually gone.
okay, yeah,
Conley, Eric All, Martin Robinson, and Tyler Warren. Um, the four guys that are new, as we look at the new top 12, are the four guys in the bottom that took over those 9, 10, 11, and 12 spots, which are Colston Loveland. Jaheim Bell is back. R.J. Maryland, I believe, is back from very early in the season. And then Trey Knox, who our guy Nino had picked up last week on the waiver watch and identified as a guy that he expected to be more consistent throughout the remainder of the year, has now worked his way into the top 12. And he was just sitting right outside of the top 12 along with R.J. Maryland to begin with. So, those guys were hovering around 9 points or, 8.8 point range. But because of now their more consistent performances, they've worked their way in. According to the notes here, you've got R.J. Maryland, who's had 3 in a row now with double digits. He's had 12, 14, and 10. And then you've got Trey Knox. He had 8 points this week, but the 3 prior to that, he had 15, 12, and 19. So, looks like those 2 guys, I think, could be guys that don't leave the top 12. Jaheim Bell has shown he's going to be a little inconsistent. He's bounced in and out already, but I will note on him, he's had 13 points the last 2 weeks, each of the last 2 weeks, with 6 and 10 targets. And he's had a few other games this year with 6 targets. So as far as tight ends go, that's a pretty high number. somewhere in the middle, he got shut out and didn't have any targets. They didn't note it as an injury, but those are the weird things that happen with tight ends this year. Is you can go from 6 targets to 0, it seems like. But um, Loveland, as kind of the final guy here that's made his way in, has done it in a little bit different fashion. He's had 2 huge games as far as tight end numbers go. He's had back-to-back games with 17 and 24 points, and prior to that, he was pretty inconsistent. With 2 point game, a 9 point game, a 6 point game. So I don't know if you can count on the 17 and 24 every week, but he's getting touchdowns, which is why his points have gone up. He's not necessarily a guy who's getting a ton of targets in volume. So I don't know if you want to count on him, but he is a guy that if he's available, maybe you can go grab him and put your hope in the fact that he'll get the random touchdown or two like he has these last 2 weeks. But I don't know that he'll be as reliable as these other 3 that have kind of made their way into the top 12. Any thoughts on Loveland and how people should proceed there with him? I know it's a bye week this week, so it won't matter.
I don't expect it to stay quite this high. Michigan is going to score points, obviously. So they have the bye, then they have Purdue, and then they have to go on the road twice before they finish up with Ohio State. So I don't see it lasting. Him lasting here unless it's going to be around the 12-13 spot.
I didn't see the target production that the others have. You don't necessarily want to rely on a guy that's getting 4 targets a game and hope he gets a touchdown. Is all I'm saying. Okay, I'm going to start us off here at tight ends as far as predicting the best and the worst. I think, and we've agreed, by the way, we know Bowers is out for several weeks, but he is still in a position where he qualifies to be on the list because he's played in more than half the games this season. So he'll remain here, but we've agreed not to pick him as our worst just because it seems unfair. It's too obvious. So we're not including Bowers as a candidate for our worst. But with that said, I think I'm going to start with the worst because I mentioned him earlier, having had the ankle injury last week, and it seems that ankle injuries, even if you can come back during a game, the swelling and the pain really sets in post game when the adrenaline's gone down, and can really hamper a guy for the rest of the season in a lot of cases. So I'm no doctor. I haven't even been able to look closely at if it's a high ankle injury or how bad it might be. But I'm going to go ahead and take Ben Sano as my prediction for the worst tight end. Just with a gut feeling that ankle injuries will tend to linger and slow you down, especially at the tight end spot, where you kind of need to have your legs under you for some of the other work besides catching passes.
Mm-hmm. I've been anticipating this game to come. So we had talked about Holker and they face Air Force, so it's either going to be he or Horton that's going to lose a little bit this week.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of torn in between those. But I think it's actually going to be Mitchell Evans.
Okay.
Is who I'm going to take this week. Notre Dame's offense just something seems a little off. I mean, we even parted ways with the quarterback in the Kings Classic. Yeah. So, for that very reason. So I just don't see it happening. I mean, Pittsburgh's not a slouch. And what are they? Fantrax has 83rd. I just don't see. So they are 27th actually. 27th nationally is what I have them at.
Okay.
Giving up 195 yards a game through the air. So I'm going to go Evans here instead of Holker.
Okay. Yeah, and the interesting note on Holker, when you mentioned that, Torrey Holton's sitting there number 1 among the wide receivers, the interesting note there is that Fantrax has Air Force number 1 against wide receivers, but 81st against tight ends. It might be one to kind of take note of and kind of visit over the weekend, Willie. We'll see how that plays out if it translates, because we've always wondered about the accuracy of those Fantrax rankings and if they should really be used as predictors. But the fact that they're really good against receivers, but seems like pretty bad against tight ends. This will be an interesting test with Holker on one end and Torrey Horton on the other to see which one they end up shutting down, if they shut down, both, or maybe, both of them can have good games. We'll find out.
Right, because Air Force is fourth, against the pass in the country.
Right, but
So,
somehow the tight ends are doing pretty
hmm
well, and maybe that's just because guys can't throw downfield against them. We'll see.
right, yeah,
Yeah. So the one note on the worst too, I do want to point out Michael Harrison. Um, you know, Weeks ago, we had Kyle from KL Fantasy on Twitter on our waiver watch, and he pointed out that you really saw Harrison have an uptick in targets as soon as
Hunter,
Colorado's
Hunter,
what's that? Yeah, as
you
soon as
talking about
Hunter went
Hunter?
out for Colorado. Interestingly, you saw Michael Harrison go way down when Hunter came back. So, um, that's somebody I almost predicted to be worst because there seems to be a correlation there. Hunter goes out, Harrison's numbers go up. Hunter came back, Harrison's numbers go down. So keep an eye on that if you're a Harrison owner. Something to think about. But as far as the best this week, I'm going to go with our guy Cade Stover against Wisconsin. Uh, we were one of the groups that had Stover in the top 10, actually maybe even the top 9 uh, in our preseason rankings. A lot of people just looked at him as maybe a big blocking tight end that was only going to catch 2 or 3 passes a game. We saw a little more potential in him, and he's really been as consistent as you can get as far as tight ends. He's not a guy that you need to rely on for touchdowns. He's that classic guy that's going to get 4 or 5 catches for 50 yards. It seems like every single game, or just about every single game. So I like Stover against the Fantrax rated 112th against tight ends, Wisconsin.
I like that. He was. I only just went with one guy that I wanted to have,
Mm-hmm.
and I just think that he's on the rise, especially their offense, and that's going to be R.J. Maryland. I mean, yeah, R.J. Maryland,
Yep.
SMU. They play Tulsa.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they beat the brakes off Temple 55 to nothing last week. And he has 3 games in a row in double digits. He obviously, and that helps that he scored in all 3 of those games.
Mm-hmm.
But Tulsa is 126th nationally against the pass, uh, giving up 14 scores.
Yep.
So I see Maryland probably, like you said, he might end up taking Harrison's next
Right.
week.
Right. Moving all the way
Yeah,
up to number 8. You're
right.
saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and he was a consensus favorite, by a lot of folks in the preseason. He was a top 10 guy for most prognosticators, and we weren't down on him. We had him up there as high as everybody, and it's not necessarily that he's been super disappointing. He just was a little bit inconsistent in the first half.
Well, what happened too also is that, when you have those cream puffs early, I mean, they played Prairie View and beat them 69 to nothing, and they didn't need him. So,
Right, that's a
uh,
good point. That's a good point.
yes, so that's hurting his average also. So it takes a while to get that 0 off of your average.
With the group of 5 teams, it can go the other way sometimes too. You could either have the cream puff or the team you're just totally outmatched against. Who do you see? Who did they play kind of from the Power Five that might have also stifled him if there was one matchup like that? Here's one. They played Oklahoma week 2 and he had 6. So he had. That's a great point you made as far as the non-conference stuff, because again, once you get into kind of that equal level competition, you see what a guy's really about. So he had 6 against Oklahoma, followed by 0 against Prairie View. So
Hmm.
that really
Hmm.
explains the early season dilemma over what's going on with R.J. Maryland. One, he was probably just overmatched. The next game, they didn't even need to play him because they won 69-0. But now that he's been in conference play, it looks like uh, he's averaging probably 11 or 12 points a game in these last 4 versus his season average of 9.6. So
Yeah, so I
uh,
mean, he's going to get his 5 targets and 3 catches, and then it's going to be whether or not he can get in the end zone.
right, and he is a guy that's more athletic, that has kind of a longer yards per catch. A lot of tight ends it'll be 3 for 10 or 3 for 40. Yeah, his 3 catches could end up being 50 or 60 yards because of his athletic.
Hmm. Yeah.
All right,
So
so there you have it. There's the tight ends. We will now move to the quarterbacks. the big note here is this was a phenomenal week for QBs across the board. 8 out of the 10 quarterbacks who played from the top 12 had 20 points or more. And better than that, 6 out of the 10 that played had nearly 30 points. 6 out of the 10 had 29.6 points or more. So you had more than half of the eligible quarterbacks basically have 30-point games, out of the group in the top 12 here. And it's a lot of it's right here at the top. You had, Jaden Daniels, 29.8, Caden Salter, 29.6, Jackson Dart, 28.5. Willie's prediction to be the best performance was Drake May, and this shows you how well the quarterbacks did. Willie didn't get any points for picking Drake May as the best quarterback because he ended up being the fourth best quarterback with 29.6 points.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Fortunately for me, I called the Castellanos rise accurately. He ended up being, if you haven't seen Castellanos' stat lines, go check him out. This guy is getting 100-yard rushing games to go along with 200-yard passing games like you wouldn't believe. Is also what Haynes King has been doing, and I thought he might, be the worst of the bunch. I did put a note with that I didn't think he was going to have a bad game, but I thought there would be a lot of good games by quarterbacks and that Haynes King would happen to have the worst. He ended up having the second best performance with a stat line that was almost identical to Castellanos in terms of being able to have a 200-yard game with, I think, 150 yards rushing, if I'm not mistaken, for Haynes King to get 33.2 points. So these were two guys we spent a lot of time on last week. So, they've been on our radar. We called that game as one that was actually going to be very exciting. And you definitely got your money's worth if you tuned into the Boston College Georgia Tech game as far as watching the quarterback play and the quarterback production. I know King did have a couple of interceptions also. Hopefully if you had him, that didn't hurt you too much, but I think his rushing yards more than made up for that.
I will say before we go and go to Caleb about Castellanos,
Yep.
he did kind of have a down week. It's because the week before he had 31 carries against Army, but so he came back down to his average. For he is that dual threat guy. For him to be getting 14 carries a game is crazy to me. So how good can he be going forward? Before we go on to the other guys, I just thought he had a phenomenal game.
Yeah, and
So
it looks like
great call by you.
Oh, thanks. I'm looking his eligibility. He's played 2 seasons, so he should have 2 more full seasons after this as well. So he's already transferred once. Looks like he came over from UCF, but it's going to be interesting to see if Boston College can keep him. This is the kind of quarterback you wonder in this day and age. Is even though he's transferred once, doesn't mean he won't transfer again, and it'll probably take quite a bit for Boston College to hold on to him. These are the things we have to think about now.
Now, what's going on in UCF that they can't keep these kind of guys, man?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, maybe that was strictly a decision that when Plumlee announced he was coming back, he just said, "Forget it, I'm out of here."
Yeah, so like I say, that to me that's a mistake by UCF then, but
Right.
you
Yeah.
know,
Right. And but again, Haynes King, guys, he's right there too. He hasn't had a game below 20 points, I believe, all season, which is pretty
yeah.
amazing too.
So I guess you won't be doubting King anymore.
No, I won't be doubting him. And again, I wanted to make sure people know. I even was on the record saying I don't think he was going to have a bad one. I
No.
did predict the good performance across the board by the quarterbacks is the way I'd like to look at it. Definitely
And
didn't think he'd have 150 rushing yards though.
right. And before we go to Caleb,
Yep.
I have no idea what was going on with Michael Penix Jr. and
Right.
Washington's offense for 10.9. I mean,
Yep.
when
Yep.
everyone else is in the high 20s and 30, man,
Yep.
that was a disappointment.
Well, put it this way, I was going to save it for the next screen, but when we talk about who's in and out, like amazingly, Penix is not in the top 12 anymore because of that game. Also, because everybody else did so well. Penix 11-point game couldn't keep him in the top 12, even though he's still averaging 26.2 for the
Yeah,
season.
and so just so we're not glossing over it, yeah, I did get 2 points there for Caleb having a down game against Utah.
Right,
So
right. No, you called. You were on the record, probably one of the few people I would say on the record saying that Caleb would have back-to-back bad games here. A lot of people probably assume the opposite, that he would bounce back against Utah, and you successfully called out the fact that you thought it would be pretty tough against Utah to have
mhm.
a bounce back game, and that's exactly the way it ended up. Was he was the second worst quarterback from the top 12.
Yeah, and I I still can't get that image of him sitting on the bench at the end of that game, just wondering what the hell just happened.
Yeah,
So,
and you're starting to find out who the Caleb Williams haters are now for sure, because
oh,
they're
absolutely,
making
yeah,
themselves heard.
oh
So,
yeah,
but even with that game, he's had enough to keep him there in the number 2 spot, even though his average dipped a little bit, and he's now tied with Dylan Gabriel for second. Um, that margin has increased for Jalen Daniels, who's now up to 35.6 points a game, which for this late in the season, I'll say is a pretty startling in a good way number for Jaden Daniels, and he gets a week off the rest now, so no telling what he's going to do when he comes back with time to game plan against whoever their Week 10 opponent is. But yeah,
that's
there's now
Alabama,
that's going to be a fun one then. Next Week 10,
right?
Alabama LSU. Earmark that one now, but. Yeah, this margin is pretty shocking now between Daniels at number 1 and the two guys tied at number 2 with 30.6.
Oh yeah, and Castellanos is right there. I mean, let's
Yeah, yeah,
let's
that's
not,
fun.
he's at 30.4, so he is right there. And
Yeah,
to me, still, I mean, Salter and Byron Brown are still right there. So,
right.
uh, it's going to be interesting, 2 through 6.
Yeah, I'm pretty shocked. When he came on our radar at first, it was probably week 4, and we were talking about the fact that Castellanos, was a steady low 20s quarterback, and you could at least count on him, to produce on a regular basis. It looked like. Now the last 2 weeks he's had 35 plus, so he's showing potential to be a guy that could push for this number 1 spot, and he's probably the most legitimate dual threat on the list out of this entire
Hmm.
group. I mean,
Right.
it's been a long time since you've seen guys that are pretty sure will get 80 yards rushing and 200 yards passing in every game, and he's beginning to become that guy.
Right.
And look who
And
he's playing this week.
oh goodness.
He's
Yeah,
playing
yeah,
UConn,
goodness.
guys. So we'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see if he gets picked again for somebody's best. Um, and let's see. Oh, the other two new names we talked about: Penix being moved out. Delora was also moved from the top 12 because he's just not qualifying. He hasn't played in enough games due to missing 3 because of his injury. Uh, you know, he's averaging 27 and a half, but he doesn't qualify because he's missed half the season. He might make his way back on here next week. We'll just have to see. He should play, but meanwhile, those two leaving have made room for 2 really good players here. Maybe the only guy that would contend with Castellanos as an equal dual threat, which is Diego Pavia, who out of the group is probably the next most likely to be able to count on for 100 yards rushing in a given game. He's tough as nails, and he's had 24 plus in his last 5, beginning with the infamous New Mexico game. I did go back and look that up. It was, when you know,
Yeah, what
apparently before the big rival game against New Mexico 5 weeks ago, decided to urinate on the logo during the walkthrough the night before, and ever since then he's been on fire. So we're pretty sure that just that released the poison, and he's been on fire since then, and deserves to be here along with the guy that you singled out last week that you would not be surprised if he made his way into the top 12 this week, and you were right on point, and that's Donovan Smith, uh, who's had back-to-back big games. Uh, Actually, his last 3, 35, 35, and 26. Um,
yeah.
so Donovan Smith, you would expect it from a Holgorsen quarterback. Everybody said going into the season he was a perfect fit for the Dana Holgorsen system. It took him a little time to get ramped up after starting the season with some I think an 18 and an 8-point game in the middle of the season. But here you go. He's had 5 out of 7 with 20 points, and he seems to be gaining in terms of his consistency.
Yeah, 11 touchdowns to 1 interception. Yeah, you can't beat that. So
Right.
um,
Yep.
good to see him moving up the list. It's going to be interesting who we take here because I think I've already changed my mind. So
Okay, go ahead.
uh,
You can
let
start
me
us
know if
off.
you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's rock and roll.
Yeah, because I was going to take Diego as my worst. I was
Okay.
going to do that. Uh, but I flipped on that. So I'm actually gonna go with Diego.
Okay. And
Uh,
that is a Tuesday night game. So for those listening, that game is today. We're recording on Tuesday. So we'll do the same as we did last week, just to make sure it's out there on the record and make sure it's posted for those that
mhm.
want to make.
I was looking at their pass defense, but you still got to look at their run defense. And the dual threat that he is. They're giving up quite a bit on the ground. I want to say they've given up 15 touchdowns on the ground also. So uh, with him being that dual threat, I'm going to change my mind here, and I'm going to actually take him as my best for the week.
That makes sense. I see the logic. All right. Well, I'm going to go with one of your guys. I like what I've seen with Salter. He's playing a pretty bad Western Kentucky defense. So for my best, I'm going to steal one of the guys you liked early in the season and picked a few times with just Caden Salter against Western Kentucky. They're 104th against fantasy quarterbacks, according to
Hmm.
Fantrax, and in pass, they are 116th, giving up 260 yards a game. So Salter, he's also got a little dual threat ability. Um, so I like the entire package there. I'll take him
That was the guy I actually wrote down.
to pick.
But yeah, to take. But
Okay.
you know, I,
A
I,
double
you know, I,
double
I just,
endorsement for Salter. That still
yeah.
counts as a double endorsement in some way.
And so, I don't think you can go wrong here. And then, and then looking at Castellanos, uh, UConn has given up,
Right.
16 touchdowns on the ground. So there's, a lot of good quarterbacks here. I don't think that there's going to be a guy that we can just say, hey, stay away from, but we got to do it.
Yeah, what's interesting, and we're up to that point.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to go with a guy, man,
Yeah, it's
like I
tough.
said, so many good quarterbacks.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll just take this guy only because he has been kind of like the low man on the totem pole the last 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I know who they're facing, but we just got to pick one. So I'm going to go Jackson Dart.
Yeah, we've kind of hated on Dart off and on all season,
Hmm.
but he's you kind of pinpointed why he hasn't shown the consistency.
But
So he'll fool you into thinking he's worth starting every week with some really big games, but he kind of continued that streak again. So just looking at his last 5, going back 5 games, 40 points, 16, 42, 13, 28. So you're right. This is the week that you would expect something in the teens instead of something in the high 20s or 30s. Oh,
and how in the world? I mean, with the way that well, I guess LSU is doing a lot of scoring. So,
right.
he had that big game against LSU and that huge win, that 55-49 win. So he had those 4 touchdowns, and that's been basically it. He's had one through the air since then. So per game. So let's just take him. I'll take him as my worst. So
Yeah. This is probably the toughest group overall that we've had to decide from in terms of a worst because really
and wow, yep.
every everybody that you would lean towards they have maybe an advantage because they're playing such a bad defense. Donovan Smith, he's playing Kansas State, which so I'm kind of just leaning towards Donovan Smith, Haynes King, or Shador Sanders. All the others I believe will have really big games,
I mean,
except
to me, the worst this week, sorry, might be 26 and a half. So, I mean, he might get his
right.
average, and that might be the worst.
Yeah, and but for that same logic, I think that's why I will go with Shador Sanders as the worst. If you have him, this is a case where I'm saying if you have him, and he's still worth playing in my opinion because I'm like you. I think he could still have a 24, 25 point game. I just don't know in this case that he'll live up to his average, which is another way we've looked at this. Um, and
And,
if I'm just
and
comparing him, if who is most likely to get 25, I would say Donovan Smith and
mhm.
maybe Haynes King because of his legs. Uh, and Sanders, that bad O line is just going to catch up with him at some point. He's kind of outrun his O line and outperformed his O line as much as he can do. So it's going to be interesting to see if he can keep that up for the rest of the season.
Yeah,
Um,
so I mean, if you're lucky enough to have more than one person on this list,
mhm.
hats off to you. And but if not, then go ahead and take Sanders if you don't have anybody else on this list.
Right, right. So, but yeah, we're saying now that probably everybody on this list will get over 20 points this week. It'd be
Yeah, I mean
shocking
because
if somebody.
what was his worst game was against Oregon, and so outside of that, it was Arizona State, and where he had 17.9. So I don't know if UCLA can shut him down that effectively, but we'll see.
Yep. All right. Well, that was tough.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to close it out with the running backs. And the thing that stood out to me among running backs last week was just there were so many that were off in the top 16, which made it kind of interesting in itself. You had 6 buys out of the top 16, and then the fact that Rasheen Ali didn't suit up and play for Marshall because of the ankle injury that I had mentioned, but I thought he might be okay since he did play through it in the North Carolina State game. Uh, you ended up with only 9 guys playing, and so of that 9, they did, respectable. 6 out of the 9 had over 18 and a half, which I would think, we all consider a decent game for a running back. Um, 5 out of those 9 had 23. So more than half the group here had 23 plus out of those that were eligible to play. Um, we actually were right on the marks when it came to the guys that wouldn't perform. There were just a couple that didn't perform well, and we called them out successfully. Willie B has kind of been putting his warning out there, the Willie warning against Darius Taylor, and that he didn't think when he would come back he would be everything that he was before the injury. He ended up having the second worst performance, and that's only because we count Ali as a zero because it wasn't known that he wasn't going to play. So Ali was the
Hmm.
worst performance because he didn't play.
Hmm.
Taylor was the actual second worst, and then I predicted the third worst with R.J. Harvey, who honestly I thought had a much better game than this 12.9 because it looked like he was running wild on Oklahoma at times. But the fact that he
Well,
didn't get in the end zone hurt him. So again, you may not be completely disappointed if you had him in with 13, but I don't think you're necessarily
I mean, you have to understand too. I mean, yeah, he did, but he also had that 54-yard run.
right. Right. So then,
So,
and you're looking at the fact that I think he had like 20 carries. So yeah, you're looking at the fact that outside of the 54-yard run, he had 19 carries for like 60 yards on top of that as well.
yeah, so yeah, around 40 something. Yeah, so
Right.
that's why. And then, so flipping that script, you go to the best. I mean, and now before we go there, Hampton, I was a little surprised. I thought he might do a little bit better
Yeah.
than that
Yeah.
14.1, but
Well, he's playing with me. Like now that I put my faith in Hampton and gave him my endorsement because this is what I expected from Hampton the 2 weeks that I picked him as the worst. Is I thought his 42 early on skewed his average and it was giving him an average of 20 something a game when he really was a guy who was going to be in the teens. Then he had back-to-back games over 30 something, and made me look bad. Now he slipped. Now the week I don't pick him, and I say I'm not going to pick him again. He only has 14.
Yeah. So I mean, but to outside of that big game against Miami, that is right around his average. So maybe that's just the guy he's going to be. Maybe he, once we move it up here, we'll see where his average is. But maybe he is just going to be that 14, 15 point guy.
Yeah, and before we move it up, I guess we'll point out the fact that uh, again, we kind of nailed it here on the running backs all around. I had predicted Kyrie Robinson as the best. He ended up being the second best with 28.4. Despite what his running back mate there is stealing from him, he still performed exceptionally well. And
Hmm.
while you didn't get any points for Jonathan Brooks, he was the fourth best. But more importantly, he had 23 points. So again,
Right.
predicting Brooks is the best and steering people to play him if it was a decision with somebody else, you were still on point. With the prediction, he was just up against some tough competition this week in terms of some high scores here.
And
Marquise Irving getting 39.
yeah,
Um, that's another
And Brooks didn't get in the end zone.
right. Yeah, yeah. So that's actually more impressive to get 23 with.
And so, but yeah, go ahead and talk about Bucky.
Oh, Bucky. Yeah, I forget what he had the week before, but I know he had 22 carries the week before. What was his
Tw-
stat line to get him this 39 this week?
Yeah, last week he had 28.1 points. But
Okay.
so yeah, this week he had 15 for 129 and two rushing touchdowns, and then he had three receptions and another score, which
Okay. So,
I don't know if you saw that, but if I was watching film, Washington State, I didn't even look up this kid's name, but number 8, I have no idea what you were doing on that screen for the touchdown. I mean, you have no idea where you're guarding grass and got blown up on his way to the end zone. So if you go back and look at that, Jeremy, it was crazy. I haven't seen that in a long time.
now that we're pulling clips, I'll try to pull the clip and find that so we could run it during this.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
So
but what I was saying, he had 22 carries the game before, so that's and we wondered would he start to now see an increase from the 12 to 13 carries he had per game. So it looks like he is.
mhm.
The last two games, he's had quite a few more carries than he had, in any of the games before. Not maybe not quite a few, but he's exceeded the 12 or 13 he was averaging in the so. All
All
right,
right. So
so we'll
are we
move up
ready?
to the
We ready to
current
do
top
this? Okay.
12,
16. Yeah, that's
and
good.
yeah, so from this group, we've got two in and two out, and the group that is in is a pretty impressive bunch here. Ollie Gordon and Webb have made their way in from
Okay.
they
Okay.
both made their way into the list with 4 touchdowns in their games. So that was the thing that stood out to me is I don't know that we've ever seen two guys come into the list at the same time, both because they ended up with 4 touchdowns in their individual games. That neither one was too far outside of the 16, so they had been kind of hovering around, that 20-point mark, uh, with pretty solid seasons. But 4 touchdowns in a game is going to catch everybody's attention. And Ollie Gordon specifically following up a 46-point game with a 52.
Yeah. So I was gonna uh, talk about him and see where he came from, before that. So what makes it more impressive to me with Gordon, he came from 70 to 19. Now he's at 6 with those two impressive weeks. So and he back to back 29 carry games. That's impressive. Um, Back to back, so he had 46.4, and then this week he had 52.2. So that's really impressive.
And Webb, on the other hand, is probably a little bit more consistent throughout the season. He's had 19 plus in 6 out of his 7 games.
Hmm.
I noticed that in his first game he only had 5 points, but if you look at his average over the last 6, he's actually averaging closer to 25 points a game, which would get him close to the top five here in terms of how he's produced over the last six. Now, obviously, you have to count every game. He played in game one, so he deserved the 5 points for whatever reason. So I'm not saying he deserves to be number five. I'm just saying he's outperformed his 21.9 average ever since week one. He's been a different player and a better player than what week one showed us. And actually a much better player, even proven again by this week with the 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, and he's gonna get his 17 carries is what he should be getting. So that's he's gonna get that production. So I would imagine that he's probably gonna stay here for a minute.
I agree. And then I will now look to make my pick for the best performance. And there's a really interesting group at the top. I'm gonna shy away from Ali as the best because I'm not sure how the ankle is doing. But I've got a tough choice here in my mind between Robinson, Carroll, and Jeanty. Seems like every time you pick Jeanty, he performs best, and when I do, he had his one mediocre game. So that's going to keep me shying away from him. I'm going to go back to Marcus Carroll, who's looked and he is the highlight of their offense from everything I've seen when I watched Georgia State. They're a good team all around, by the way, this year. They are the real deal and have a good shot at winning the Sun Belt. But I like him against Georgia Southern. To keep doing what he's doing. They've given up 14 touchdowns. They don't give up a ton of yards, but Marcus Carroll's a big, strong back who has found his way to the end zone. So he's the kind of guy that's going to lower his shoulder and turn a 4-yard gain into an 8-yard gain from everything I've seen from this guy. So I think he'll still get his yards because he gets those hard-earned yards and does manage to find his way.
Well, I'm going to switch it up on you. I'm going to take my worst first.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so and really the only reason why I'm doing this is because I'm not sure on the health. They had the bye, but we're gonna say Ishmael Mahdi only because I don't know how the hand, wrist, whatever it is going to be. So we'll see if he still has it bandaged up or if it's gotten enough for him to just wear a regular glove. I don't know. So I'm just not going to take that chance there. And so I'll take him as my worst.
Okay. Let's check one stat. Yeah, that's what I thought. I'm going to go Braylon Allen. Better than he's performing about where I said early in the season he belongs, or I thought he would be. I mentioned early in the season that I felt like over the last 2 preseasons he's probably been hyped up a little bit too much, not necessarily because he's not a great running back, but because people have him typically in preseason in the top 7 or 8, which indicates he could be like a 26, 27, 28 point back on a regular basis. But this is where he seems to finish. He finishes around, 15 to 25. So while he's a very good back, he's probably not that, top 5 to 10 back. And I think against a team like Ohio State, they'll be able to shut him down and keep him out of the end zone. Only 5 touchdowns given up, not too many yards. So not a knock against the guy, but again, another nod to his opponent this week with Allen facing a tough Ohio State defense.
Okay. So I had 2 guys here, and that it needed to, just decide because I wanted to, I was hoping you'd take one of them, but you didn't. I'm going to give one here that you probably should take is Marion Hampton. They are going against Georgia Tech, who's 132nd in the country. They've given up 17 rushing scores. They give up 227 on the ground. But I'm not taking him. I'm actually going to take Blake Watson, who's going against North Texas, who is actually dead last in rushing. They've given up 19 on the ground, and they give up 255. So we're going to go Blake Watson, and not only that, I like the rest of Memphis's schedule. So they have North Texas, they get UCF, and then they get Charlotte, and then SMU is going to be their toughest game, because and then they finish up with Temple, which Temple can't stop anybody right now. So Blake Watson might be moving up into the top five here pretty soon.
Interesting pick there. Yeah, Devin Neal was probably another one that I was considering for worst because again he's playing Oklahoma team that's definitely better on defense this year than they have been in the past, and they are spreading the ball around a little bit in Kansas, to where you can't quite count on him to get a lot of volume or as much volume as he might have expected. So that would be I don't know if I'll make it for that one, but I think I've said all I can say today, Willie. How about you?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I am interested to see if Gordon can continue this against a Cincinnati defense that's really tough against the run.
Right.
That's one that I'm intrigued about. And then I stayed away from Genty only because how Wyoming's been performing. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested to see those games.
All right.
And
Sounds
then and
good.
then and then and we'll know for sure how real Oregon is when they go to
Yeah.
Utah.
Yeah. That's the other one that I thought you were going to mention too is Irving versus Utah. We'll find out how much of the real deal he is there. Um, let's do over under on his average just for fun. He's averaging 23-2. Will Irving get over or under his average versus Utah? I'm going to say under.
Ooh.
I can see about a.
Utah, yeah, they're sixth. They've
Mm-hmm.
given up 7 scores. Yeah, I'm gonna say just under. I'll say I'm gonna say he gets 16 and a half.
All right, we might have added a new feature just now too that we can think about picking a couple guys and saying over and over under on their
Oh, yeah. I like
average.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
that's a
like
good one.
that.
All right. Well, with that, it's always been always a good time giving our thoughts here. Hopefully, you find something helpful. This is Jay Mill. You can catch us at CFF Lists on Twitter, YouTube, and Spotify. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, spread the word, like us, leave a comment, let us know what you'd like to hear more about. We love those kind of comments. Willie B, any final thoughts?
No, you did great this past week. I'm gonna try to hold on to my lead, but you're making it tough on me. But
I'm catching
other
a
than
point.
that, yeah, exactly. Other than
Every
that, thanks for watching and listening. Good luck this week.